It seems to be an ongoing saga, as I can see things. Just to recap a bit, we saw an application last year which we refused because of the size of the rooms, etc. We then had a second application in which we accepted, and which seemed a bit more sensible. Since then, a lot of water's gone under the bridge, and lo and behold, we're in for another application now, which looks almost identical to the original application. Also, we also had earlier in the year, or last year rather, the landscaping situation, which we weren't happy with and sent back. And lo and behold, the application that we received this time has got exactly the same landscaping as the previous one. So obviously we weren't listened to at all on that, even though we said we wanted to come back to the committee. So really, not at all happy with the situation going on. I think the deputies made some very, very good points. I agree with everything that's been said, actually. But probably just to address a few bits and pieces, we've now seen this revised table turn. There's been piles of stuff put in there, and certainly I was copied in from an objector on the import of the material, which it seemed to say that it would fall under the environmental permitting regulations. Now we're told that this was put in because of pile driving. Well, my experience of pile driving is you don't need level land, you can pile drive on land on a slope, so I don't quite understand that. So what I'm slightly concerned about with the revised table, for instance, is A, the material that's been used in it, i.e. the concrete, which seems to be against the environmental permitting regulations. Secondly, how do we monitor it? And we're told it's there possibly as a temporary situation, but to my way of thinking is, how do we know? It's a level at the moment. How are we going to actually monitor by going in to check the levels when the house is built or whatever? So, that doesn't seem quite right to me. So I'm certainly concerned about that side of life. I think the other points really that to mention, I think Mrs. Osborne mentioned the business of the external staircase on the garages next door to Hannibal Edge. I think that is unacceptable because obviously you can climb up to the top of the staircase to go in and you can overlook Hannibal Edge. So I think to have an additional condition on that will be very useful. So I just sort of really slightly despair. I think you've seen the number of objections we've had. I think I've had more problems on this application than pretty well all the other sites and what was actually put together, to be perfectly frank. So, it just strikes me, and I think Mrs. Clapton made the point, the applicant seems to be doing things first and asking afterwards, and I think there's very much a case of that, which really doesn't help at all. I think going through the actual report itself, I think it's very clear where the officers are coming from. They're recommending rejection in that it's contrary to policy CS14, CS17 and policy DSP6. So I'm not at all happy with the situation. I think, and the other point I really wanted to make was, I think the water harvesting situation, I've witnessed this area as well, and since that's gone in, there has been pooling in the other properties as well. So obviously it has had an effect on that situation. But I guess the question I would like to ask is, on this revised table, how are we actually going to monitor it, and does it fall in breach of that situation? And the final question will be is that we know a enforcement notice was issued before this application came in, so presumably that enforcement notice will still stand. Probably a question to be answered as well. So thank you, Chairman. Not at all happy with this application.
Chairman, thank you. If I start off with the issue of the enforcement notice, the notice that was issued last year was a breach of condition notice, and that was in relation to the hours of working on the site. That means that if the developer was to continue implementing that permission, that breach of condition notice remains in effect. That's unaffected by any decisions made today. And if there's continued breach of that condition and the council has evidence, then we could potentially take legal action over that issue. If, on the other hand, a fresh permission was to be granted, so say for example members wish to permit the application that was in front of them, that breach of condition notice would not have any effect on any new permission, and if a subsequent breach then did happen, a new notice would need to be served. So hopefully that clarifies the
Chairman, sorry,
situation.
shall I just come in on that? I probably didn't ask the right question, to be perfectly honest. I think the question really is the water and harvesting situation and the infill. That strikes me as not being in agreement with the application that we agreed at the last meeting. So I guess the question is, where does that go from here if this application is rejected?
Yes, you're right, that is a separate matter. So officers, at the tail end of last year, officers investigated the reports about work on the site that had been carried out to change the levels of the land, resulting in the raised table, if I can call it that you can see on the site, and you see what you saw in the photographs, and the rainwater harvesting system. Now, our conclusion was that that work constituted development which didn't have the benefit of planning permission, and so technically speaking was unauthorised. No formal action has been taken over those matters at this present time. If members were minded to refuse this application in line with the officer's recommendation, that situation on the ground would remain the same. So if that was an ongoing concern for members about the work that had happened on the site already, and that was causing some material harm in planning terms, then we could consider as a separate matter whether it was expedient to take any enforcement action in relation to that. So just hopefully that helps to unpick the different issues here. In terms of the raised levels of the land, and I think I mentioned this during my presentation, the raised levels of the land, according to the measurements that have been taken during site visits, do not match the levels, the spot levels that are shown on the submitted plans. So the levels that you see on site are not representative of the finished floor levels of the dwelling.
Sorry, Richard, in terms of up or down?
In terms of the raised table, in my understanding, the raised table is slightly higher in parts than is proposed. In others, because of obviously the nature of the dwelling, as I explained, has varying floor levels. In some parts it is correct, but in other parts it is not. And I think the explanation that was given by the applicant when officers raised this issue with him was that it was preferable to have a flat surface on which to carry out any piling works in the future. Now, whether that's correct or not, I'm not able to say, but that certainly was the explanation that was provided.
Chairman, sorry, just one point if I may, please. On one of the photographs you showed where this raised platform is, and you can see hand wedge in the photograph. I mean, that height at the moment seems to be halfway up there, quite high fence at the present moment, which I would have thought was totally unacceptable. Any comments on that?
If I find the photograph you're referring to, that might assist. Was it the one we just went past?
Yeah, you see there at the corner of it, and where the fence, well, in fact, it's almost level with the top of the fence.
Yeah. So following on from what I was saying, my understanding from the measurements that were taken out on site when I met with the applicant and the contractors tail end of last year was that the level of the raised table at the front here is approximately in accordance with the plans that are showing the level of the floor of the house as you step in through the front door, if I put it like that. But as you'll appreciate, because of the slope of the site, the dwelling has been designed so that it steps down in certain points. So if I just go back to the floor plans, so you can see there's a step down from the entrance hallway, and then there's steps down to these wings by the side here, and then out onto the patio. And that means that when you look at this raised table that's been constructed on the site, the levels at the side here, and especially towards the back, because this is completely flat at the moment, are higher than they should be, because the fact that the dwelling would step down. So you're quite right that at the moment, if you stand in this corner here, you're in in an elevated position, which gives you views that you wouldn't get if the dwelling were built. If I could explain it like that. And I think there was another photograph that demonstrated that a little bit more. So the snooker room, for example, is shown to be several steps lower than the ground floor of the dwelling, whereas at the moment this raised table is shown is exactly the same level all the way through. So the point I think I'm trying to make is that what's before you to consider whether to grant planning permission or not is not the same as what is on the site or started to be constructed on the site. So in that respect, if you are concerned about the potential for overlooking from this raised table here, that is not what the proposal is showing, if that makes sense. It is, however, what's been constructed on the site.
Sorry, just one other point. A material that's been deposited there, we've heard from the objectors on the import of that material, which seems to be in contrary to the environmental permitting regulations. How are we going to deal with that?
As I said a moment ago, the levels of the land could be considered an engineering operation for which planning permission hasn't been granted, so technically speaking it could be considered as an authorised and subject to enforcement action. I have no information whatsoever about what material this raised table comprises, whether or not it's in accordance with environmental permitting regulations or not. As you appreciate, they are not planning regulations. I simply don't have any information about that at the moment.
Chairman, it strikes me we've probably got to split the two, and I completely understand the questions from Councillor Cartwright, split the two issues almost. I think one of the decisions today for members is whether or not the scheme as presented to you for the replacement house is acceptable, and the landscaping that goes with it, is that acceptable? The second issue is whether or not this raised platform is, in planning terms, is acceptable or justified, and also what the material actually in it is. And it seems to me that probably is a separate enforcement issue, which if it would help members, I think we need to come back to you separately on, explain to you what's there, what's in it, what we understand of it, and separately invite you to comment as to whether you would wish to take formal action against it or not. So I don't mean the decision today you're going to make is going to in any way prejudice what action this council may or may not take on the other works on the site. With the exception of the water harvesting, we are going to need to discuss that in one moment because that does form part of this application. So with your agreement, Sean, I would suggest if members would like us to, we're happy to bring that separately back to you as a committee, as an enforcement issue to consider.
Yeah, I think I'm happy with that, Chairman, actually. I didn't want the 2 points, the 2 applications being missed, if you see what I mean. I think that's entirely correct.
As I say, Chairman, the water harvesting is something that you as a committee will need to make a decision on today's funds application.
Councillor Ford?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I won't rehearse what Councillor Cartwright has already said. He has been very close to this over a number of years, a lot closer than I have, but I am fully aware of everything that's gone on here. And there's been commented by certainly Mrs. Clapperton, the act first and ask later situation that seems to have been here for some time. And okay, we can't hold that against them for this application, but as we've said on numerous occasions, it's something that really sticks in our throat, I think it would be fair to say. So I think on that basis the applicant doesn't do themselves a whole lot of good, but anyway, we have to set that aside. I agree with the points. It sounds like déjà vu here, that we're going back to October 2016, but to be fair to Mr. Ray, who mentioned that the difference between this one and the 2016 application was the location of the wings and the ridge height. And I don't know if Richard just may be able to clarify that situation there, and then perhaps I can just have another word, please.
Chairman, I beg your pardon, I'm just looking because I think there is a paragraph in your report which neatly summarises the differences, but I'm just trying to locate it.
I thought that was the case actually, Richard, and I couldn't put the hands on it.
Thank you, thanks Alex. Yeah, Chairman, at the bottom of page 26, the paragraph starts, the main differences between the dwelling previously permitted and the current proposal. And as Councillor Ford says, it says are the reintroduction of the 1.5-storey wings on either side of the dwelling, the provision of second floor accommodation an alteration style and appearance of the dwelling. So if it helps, if I go back to the elevations, the comparison, and this is, admittedly, this is only the front elevation, but I think it emphasises the point.
It's with the refused one that I'm most concerned
Yeah.
with, rather than the approved one in 2017, the difference between this one and the refused one in 2016.
Absolutely. So the top image is the 2016 refusal. The bottom image is the current proposal, and as you'll see, I would suggest the main differences are, and it's not obvious, I'm afraid, from this because this is the front elevation, but as you can see, you've got these wings either side here, and in this application you also have wings. In fact, if anything, they are slightly higher, slightly more prominent. In front of them are the garages, which are the same. But the main dwelling itself, there's also differences not only in the architectural style, but also in the bulk and massing, mainly through the different treatment of the roof and the eaves. So previously a traditional pitched roof with eaves around. The current proposal is to form a parapet wall with a roof inside of that, with a flat roof element on top of that also. And so you can clearly see the main differences there, I suggest, are in that third story, in that second floor. And in addition, there's accommodation to be provided at that second floor level as well, which was not proposed in 2016.
Jim, yes, thank you, Richard. That's very helpful. So, on that basis, the location of the wings, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of change, and ridge height probably similarly.
In terms of ridge height, I think the ridge is if anything, is slightly lower, but it's really about an appreciation of the overall bulk and massing. Just simply to take the ridge height as a marker might be misleading, because if you look at the top image, you see the design of the roof being fully hipped, pitched roof, and then look at the bottom. It's a large flat roof element at the top here. This is a relatively steep sloping roof inside of a parapet, so the overall parapet wall height is higher than the eaves height previously.
Thank you again, Chairman. Thank you, Richard. That's very, very helpful. Yeah. In summary, I'd probably say, well, what's changed really? Has the reason for refusal in 2016 been mitigated by the current proposal? And it seems at best it's tinkering. And I would agree as well with the point that was made by the Deputy and Councillor Cartwright made regarding the stairs at the side of it. I think if that was a window on the side, we'd have concerns about it. We'd probably ask for it to be obscure glazed. If it was a balcony overlooking the garden, we'd probably ask for some partition or obscure glazing to prevent the views down. But it seems the staircase is almost getting away with it, which again would cause overlooking. So I'd be with Councillor Cartwright on that. I have concerns over that window, but over those stairs. But I just can't see anything in this current proposal that mitigates against the reasons for a refusal last time. In fact, the bulk, to my mind, seems somewhat greater. So, yeah, I can't see any reasons for approving this.
Councillor Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully agree with the two members who have spoken. I think looking at the design of that building, it looks more like a commercial building to me than a house. Certainly what we approved, it looks like a house, and to me that's what it should be. For Mr. Ray, who made a comment about people walking along the River Hamble there, expecting to look at all the big houses and what have you, I'm not quite sure that I would agree with that. I think people walk along there for the views and the pleasures of walking along the shoreline there. The thing which does concern me is that, and I totally agree about these stairs, can we include some comment about that in the conditions for refusal? Because, I mean, by just putting the numbers in without some explanation and including that, I would have thought would have been wrong. I think we need to make some reference to that so that they can't just come back, so that the concerns are there. I have a problem about the land raising, in the sense that the officer's saying we're going to have to deal with it afterwards. Now, it's almost like putting the cart before the horse situation, because the land raising is there. You've got to deal with that almost before you deal with the planning application, in my mind, because if and I hope it doesn't happen, if this was approved, the land raising is there, and they would then technically be able to go and build on it, unless we got in very quickly with some sort of stop notice or issues relating to that. So I have some concerns still there, particularly with the content of the material that's there, the height, etc. The other point is the Japanese knotweed. Now, I believe, and I'm looking to our legal advice here, is that the landowner has some responsibility with Japanese knotweed if it goes to another piece of land adjoining their property, and therefore should have to deal with it. Now, I've been dealing with a few years back where Network Rail had Japanese knotwood on their railway embankments, which had encroached into a garden, a property, and they took responsibility that they actually had to deal with it. So I think that if it applied there, then surely if it can be proven that the Japanese knotweed actually is started from Drift House, then the owner of Drift House has some responsibility of dealing with it in the adjoining properties. So I'm looking for some legal advice, and if that is the case, what can we do about it?
Thank you, Councillor. I have to be honest, I'm not aware of the legal obligations on owners in respect of Japanese knotweed. Generally speaking, unless I'm trying to see if there is a connection to planning. So with the starting point of your considering this application, the main duty is to determine it in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. You have the development plan policies in front of you which point to refusal. Even in the event that this is a material consideration, I think we can probably say it's not going to alter the course of officers' refusal. They've obviously noted it and set out their remarks, although they question the origin of that. It doesn't suggest to themselves that this permission should be approved. So I don't think we would necessarily need to get further embroiled into the legal obligations for Japanese knotweed at this stage in considering this application.
So can I just come back to that? Could we get it, I mean, officers have said, looking at the raised area and the materials gone into the raised area, could we look at it in conjunction with that?
I'm happy we tackle it that way to try and help, Chairman. I mean, just extending on from what Alex Ross just said, one thing that's on my mind is we're talking about something occurring on third party land, so we can't place planning, even if we're going to grant this, we couldn't place conditions on this land requiring to want a neighbour's site to grow up a plant, because unless of course they were perfectly happy with him to go on it and how he was going to do it, he wouldn't be able to fulfil the terms of that in any event. But I'm sure, yes, in response to Councillor Price's request, yeah, we can bring back further information on dealing with Japanese knotweed. Although my recollection from our previous discussions were there was some dispute as to which site it started on. And I know that got a bit heated at times as to just which property actually started with it.
Any other? Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments. I think that our previous refusal and our landscaping requirements were soundly based. And I've actually read nothing here or heard nothing today that makes me question the essence of those decisions. So I think they are sound decisions, and I think they're equally applicable in this current application. Therefore, I support the officers' comments and their recommendation to refuse.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Seems to me this is a test of the resolve of the Planning Committee. We have the original application that was refused on very specific points. And in the second application, which was approved, those original points of objection had been eliminated, save for some elements concerning the planting of trees and screening. Now we've gone back almost marginally different in the designs, but all of those points of objection seem to be reintroduced into this. So far as the raised platform is concerned, it is said that that's been put there to facilitate construction of the new property, i.e. piling. Then surely, once it's served that purpose, in order to restore the land to the original levels, the levels according to the plan, and the whole of that material in the platform should be removed. I think that's the simple solution to that, which will reduce the external height and eliminate the potential for overlooking, etc. But I think all of the reasons that were put forward at the original application apply today, and that is for refusal.
Richard, are you able to, I'm talking about usable meterage in terms of first application, the approved application and this one. What kind of increase have we got in floor area, whatever you like to describe it as? I mean, it just seems like this building is far bigger than even the first application because it's got effectively a ground floor, a first floor and a second floor. So I'm just wondering just how much bigger this property has got, plus the wings are now got back on. And I remember distinctly the first one, we were concerned about it taking up, certainly from the handle viewpoint, you would just fill the site from one side to the other. You would just see a vast building, whether it be wings or the main body of the house. And the reason we approved the second one was because it had been brought in and given fairly spacious land up each side of the property. Are you able to comment? I don't really quantify the increased volume use of this building, or not. Thank you, Chairman. I can't quantify, I've not got figures, I'm afraid, that I can rely on. I've not got access to that information. But in any case, I might suggest that may be a little bit misleading in some respects, because it really comes down to how dwelling that's proposed is designed, its overall scale and bulk and massing, rather than its meterage. And I think in that respect, that's why it's useful to have a comparison drawing like the one that's on the screen, so that you can see what was previously proposed and found to be unacceptable because it was bulk and massing width across the plot, as you say, which was, remember, was an important consideration for members, just how much of the plot this would span across and what the visual impact of that would be. That's really the planning test. That's the judgment, and you can see. I mean, in my view, from these elevations that are on the screen, you can quite clearly see that the current proposal is bigger. Both in terms of the amount of floor space, because of the spread across obviously the second floor, there's a whole other story of accommodation, and the wings that are proposed, and also in terms of the raised eave heights and the bulk of that front and rear elevation. I mean, it's looking less like a house and more like an institution. Just the sheer scale, if you were to break that down, you'd probably be equivalent of about 3 or 4 houses there. That's how I'm viewing it. But in terms of a sensible decision, why anybody would think that they could come back having got a refusal, then got a permission for something which was acceptable, and then to come back with something even bigger than the first refusal, it seems to be taking the mickey out of this committee somehow. It just doesn't make any logical sense to me.
They know the parameters, they got permission. They knew what they got refused, and yet you come back with something even much bigger than that. No. Sorry. There's a recommendation for refusal there.
Sorry, it's about Chairman, just a couple of bits I wanted to pick up on, Ray.
Okay.
Just some bits that have been rehearsed by members, and that is that concerned about the quality of the landscaping proposed within this site. And if that is the view of members, I think we need to be more explicit on that in the reason for refusal. So I've been asked members to clarify if the actual landscape proposed on the site is adequate, and we should make sure that features as part of it. And the second point I was going to raise, and I did go and speak to Richard Wright, sorry, off mic, just to keep the debate going. And Richard tells me that the position of the staircases is identical to what's been previously permitted by this committee. So my advice would not be to refuse it on that particular ground. But if members are concerned on the inadequate landscaping, that should be included.
Sorry, Richard, perhaps you can fill us in. We approved a landscaping scheme.
No.
We haven't. It's never come back, has it?
No. Let me explain. In regards to the landscaping scheme, the proposal in 2016, of course, was refused. The proposal in 2017 was approved. However, members weren't happy that the landscaping scheme was adequate, so imposed a condition requiring it to be resubmitted. That duly happened. That was resubmitted, and then last year you considered just the landscaping scheme that was submitted as part of that condition. But it was resolved to refuse to grant approval for that. So in actual fact, there is no landscaping scheme that has been approved on this site.
I may be wrong, but I thought I read in the report what they're proposing on the landscaping scheme was exactly the same as the one we'd refused previously.
Right. And that was inadequate.
Yeah.
So we need to keep up the reasons.
If members are happy with that, I think that the inadequate landscaping proposed should be included as part of the reason to refuse it. That's the proposal to vote on.
Yeah. Right, we'll go ahead then. Proposed by Councillor Cartwright.
Sorry, Chairman. No. Mr. Smith mentioned about the water harvesting situation. Presumably that's covered under the application that we're just about to vote on, presumably.
Yeah, now is the time. If members are not happy with the water harvesting system, this is the time at which you would raise it. That is formally part of this planning application. The clear advice of officers is we don't believe there's grounds to refuse that part of the scheme. But that is before members today.
How does that rainwater harvesting scheme align with the original approved application? There wasn't one.
No, the water harvesting scheme, as I understand it, was one of the works that was carried out without consent, and we retrospectively advised them we believed it needed it, and so they did seek to regularise it through this application. So you're not actually granting it today, you don't raise objection to it, you're effectively saying you do not consider that aspect to be a problem.
Personally, I don't see any reason to refuse it on that ground, because obviously rainwater harvesting is part of what we expect to see on a lot of schemes now, and I don't see anything different about this one. So
I think, Chairman, the only point I would make, and I think the Deputy made the point, was that since that scheme's been put in, there's been flooding or pooling in adjoining properties in that respect, and I guess that's the area that we're not happy about.
that might be run off from this massive bank they've constructed.
Well, it could well be, but of course we also know the water courses in that particular area. There's a lot of streams, all sorts, that run down that bank across all properties into the River Hamble. So who knows? But it's obviously altered the effect of what was going on there naturally, perhaps.
But is that a direct result on water harvesting? Because I presume that goes into tanks, collected,
well, I mean,
and overflows goes down the garden.
But I suppose the only point, Chairman, is that we didn't have this problem, the adjoining neighbours didn't have this problem before it went in.
Councillor Price?
Chairman, I'm agreeing with Councillor Cartwright. I mean, we've heard comments from deputies about flooding since this system has gone in. Now, we've had an awful lot of rain. We don't know whether there's an extra amount of rainwater that we've had has been the cause of it, or whether this has been the cause of it. And, I mean, I think we have to be very careful, because once we've approved it, that's what we're left with, whatever gets built on the site. So I'm more minded that I'm not happy that enough investigations have actually been made on this particular scheme to make sure it is okay. That's where I would come from. So I wouldn't want to approve it now. I would want further investigations to be quite sure that it is doing what it should be doing and not affecting the surrounding areas, particularly the weather which we've had recently.
Is that not a building control issue? I just don't know where it sits in plan.
I mean, potential impact on flooding of adjoining land, I would say is a planning matter. I would say the way to tackle it would be, in light of the concerns you've still got as members and the information we've got, is on the basis of the information, limited information currently available to us, you're not satisfied that these drainage work have not led to flooding impacts on adjoining properties. So that would feature as a secondary reason for refusal, if members are concerned about that particular issue.
Yeah, I think that must be right. I don't think we have enough technical information. It's been a very unusual winter for rainfall. Flooding in my garden where we've never seen it before. So I think it'd be very difficult to draw conclusions to say that it is as a direct result of this system that's put in, even though it is an irrigation system as well as a catchment system. But I think maybe I'm not sure if we can condition it to say that any subsequent application is supported by some technical information to say what the effect of this drainage and irrigation system might be. I don't think we can draw conclusions.
Sorry, Chairman, that would be my recommendation. Members are concerned at that point that we say on the basis of the information you've currently got, you're not satisfied, that's not leading to the problems of flooding on neighbouring land.
Yeah.
And that in itself would form a second reason for refusal.
Yeah, just quickly, that seems to me a very sensible way forward. Environmentally, it's difficult to argue with the principle of it, and that's the way we're heading. But coincidentally, the issue seems to have cropped up next door since these have been installed, so we have concerns. And I think it's quite right that we need to have further information before we can be sure that it isn't the fault of this system that's causing the problems next door. So I think that is absolutely right that we should include that as a further reason for refusal.
Right. Proposed by Councillor Cartwright, seconded by Councillor Ford. Do you want to take this, Mayor? Right. All those in favour of the refusal?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
That is refused.